Hello there and welcome to episode 30 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marko. We've got a great show for you guys today, including talking some NBA bubble news and playoff reactions with Will Byerman, doing our AFC division winners and NFL wildcard predictions with Tim Seipel, then doing our weekly pick'ems with Paul Hires, and talking some European football news with the great Joseph Arena. So a great show for you guys, but before we get into that, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comment section down below. I just want to talk about some of the NFL news, mostly contracts that have come up in the past week. So first things, I want to discuss the Deshaun Watson contract, which is 4 years, $160 million. It's an extension. It doesn't kick in until the 2021 season, but clearly the Texans believe, as they should, that Deshaun Watson is their guy. He's a top 5 quarterback in the league. That's undisputed. Many people would put him in their top 3, and I wouldn't argue with that. Deshaun Watson is a great player. He has been sacked over 160 times in the past 4 seasons, which is a ridiculous number considering he's one of the more mobile quarterbacks. I think we can all agree on that in the NFL. He's a tremendous talent. And yes, he did lose a great talent at wide receiver, a guy we'll talk about next. But I think he can still push this Texans team to compete in the AFC South and then for a wild card spot in the AFC at large. I'm not sure if they can get that. I'm not sure how much I believe in Bill O'Brien as a coach. And this next move we'll discuss certainly shows me that I don't believe in him as a general manager. Again, this Deshaun Watson signing, great. You locked up your franchise quarterback for the next 4 years. Great, let's build off it. However, then they make a very questionable move this offseason in trading probably the best wide receiver in the NFL, DeAndre Hopkins, to the Arizona Cardinals for a second-round pick this year, a 4th next year, and an aging running back in David Johnson, a guy who's 30 years old. He's clearly on the decline. So a mysterious move there by Bill O'Brien, the general manager, and now the Arizona Cardinals extend DeAndre Hopkins 2 years, $55 million. Again, this will kick in 2021. He's one of the most productive wide receivers over the past 5 or 6 years, probably the best wide receiver going into this season. Again, there's a few guys you can challenge that with. Julio Jones comes to mind, but honestly, DeAndre Hopkins is probably an all-pro wide receiver for the next 5 to 8 years, and the Arizona Cardinals got him for next to nothing. A tremendous move by Steve Keim, the general manager, who I've questioned at times. I'm not sure he's the man for the job, but certainly was a great trade this offseason. So now 2 guys that were all pros both in the present and in their future, Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, no longer on the same team or even in the same conference, but certainly both still have bright futures. I just view it as very unfortunate that Bill O'Brien decided to make this move. And I understand that there's, a lack of cap flexibility sometimes in the NFL when locking yourself in with long-term contracts, and that can be frightening. And the team we'll talk about next is maybe a reason why a lot of these teams are very frightened to go all in on a small group of really elite players. Even though they'd be developing a good team core, they hate to lock in a majority of their salary cap on 10 to 15 guys. But I still don't agree with that Bill O'Brien trade, but that's in the past. Now we're talking about DeAndre Hopkins, what he can do for the Cardinals. I think everyone's overhyping Kyler Murray just a little bit. They're saying he's going to be the next Lamar Jackson. That's very well possible, especially with the talent he does have around him. Got a great offensive head coach in Cliff Kingsbury, as well as Hopkins, and then the ageless wonder Larry Fitzgerald and Kenyon Drake out of the backfield, and a defense that'll be middle of the pack, but they do play in the NFC West, and it's a very, very tough division and conference at large in the NFC. But I think DeAndre Hopkins makes them much, much better. He's an enormous threat on the outside. You can let Larry Fitzgerald operate in the slot. He can't get doubled as much. I think DeAndre Hopkins will really help Kyler Murray's development. And so I think this is ultimately a win for both Hopkins and Arizona. It's a short-term contract, so he has to keep working. He has to earn his next contract. He is getting close to 30, so they do want to keep these contracts a bit shorter than they would like to, but they have to, again, like I said, maintain some cap flexibility. Unlike the next team we'll discuss, and that's the LA Rams, who just signed Jalen Ramsey, probably a top 3 cornerback in the NFL, to a 5-year, $105 million contract. Clearly the right move to lock down Ramsey, who famously last offseason brought a literal Brinks truck to Jaguars practice to show his displeasure with Jaguars management and team leadership, their inability to get him a new contract. And he's finally getting that money. I'm sure he's very happy, and he is a very talented player. However, when you look at the Rams cap situation, it's very daunting. When you look at the amount of money they have wrapped up in guys on the team, for instance, in Jared Goff, in Jalen Ramsey, and of course, the 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, Aaron Donald, and those are certainly warranted contracts, at least on Ramsey and Donald. I'm not sure if spending that much on Goff was wise, but they certainly have a core lockdown. However, when you look at the contracts they don't have on their team anymore, it's pretty egregious. Their dead cap is the highest in the league, and it's the highest in the league by far. And that's mostly attributed to Todd Gurley and Brandon Cooks. And those are not 1-year issues. That dead cap will carry over for a few more years, especially Gurley's contract. He was just in the first year of a 5-year contract. He could have upwards of $20 million on their books each season for the next half decade. That's going to be detrimental to their ability to not only sign draft picks, let alone sign draft picks, but to get guys in free agency to fill those spots up. I think partially the reason they lost Corey Middleton in free agency to the Raiders was because of an inability to pay him what he deserves. So this Jalen Ramsey signing, yes, it's good. You lock down a great player that they spent multiple first-round picks on getting from the Jaguars. So again, there's more assets out the window. And again, Jalen Ramsey, good player, pretty great player in my opinion. I really am frightened for the future of the Rams. It's hard to believe this team is just a few years removed from a Super Bowl run, and all of a sudden, they're a 500 team. I think that they were a 500 team last year. Although if there would have been a 7th playoff seed like there is this year, they would have been the 7th seed in the NFC. But I certainly think this team is on the decline. And even though this Jalen Ramsey signing certainly will settle the locker room down a little bit, and it will make them better long term, locking Ramsey down, I am not sure how flexible this makes them. Again, he is a great player. They needed to get this done, but really they're in a bad spot financially as far as the salary cap is concerned, especially considering the fact that the salary cap will likely go down. If not slightly, if not a lot, it will go down following the repercussions of the financial losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you have to keep that into account when discussing teams' finances when it comes to salary caps and things of that nature. And then one last piece of NFL news before we welcome in Will Byerman to the show. I just want to discuss one thing here. Ryan Shazier, the former Pittsburgh Steelers middle linebacker, has chosen to retire from the NFL. If you will remember, a few years ago, he suffered a pretty drastic spine injury in a game against the Cincinnati Bengals. He hasn't played an NFL snap in over 1,000 days, and there was always a hope that he could return. We saw a video of him, maybe it was a year or so ago. He was finally beginning to walk again, and when you're talking about not being on a football field for 1,000+ days and just recently regaining the ability to walk, I mean, that's really not the progress he or anybody would hope he would have made. So he's making the decision to retire from the NFL. This could become one of the great NFL what-ifs. When you look at what the Steelers' defense is right now, and then if you were to add a Pro Bowl middle linebacker in his prime to this team, certainly Pittsburgh is already a top 5 defense. They would probably contend for being the best defense in the NFL by far if they were to have Shazier He was a smart and an intelligent player out of Ohio State, and it's really unfortunate that he will no longer be able to continue his playing career. He's just 28 years old. The last time he was on an NFL field, he was just 25, had just started his career, had just made the Pro Bowl, had dare I say, a potential Hall of Fame career ahead of himself. And it's really unfortunate to see his career end this way. Health has to be the number one priority in situations like this, and everyone should be able to understand where he's coming from, considering that it's not a motivation issue, it's not a drive issue, it's his health, his body that will not allow him to continue his NFL career, something that he worked his entire life to achieve, and then to just have it all taken away from him in an instant must have been quite tragic. So everybody feels for him. Everyone can't imagine what he's going through, but certainly holds a lot of sympathy for Ryan Shazier and hopes him all of the best in any of his future endeavors. So that's it for this little quick NFL news roundup here at the beginning. So let's get right into some reactions of some news and results from the NBA bubble. Let's welcome in Will Byerman to the show. Will, how are you doing?
Hey, great to be here, Marko. I know you and me talked a lot over the summer about how much of a risk this bubble was. I think we've seen some absolutely fantastic results. It's so great to be back and enjoying playoff basketball. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so obviously the biggest news out of the NBA, just your thoughts on the Bucks' loss in Game 5, their loss in the series as a whole, and of course their loss later in the series of Giannis to injury in the conference semifinals.
You can't exactly write off. For what it's worth, I think since the start of the season, or not since the start of the season, but since the start of the bubble, people have been saying the Heat were absolutely the worst case scenario for Milwaukee in the playoffs. They really match up well with all their strengths. They're well coached. They have a versatile, all defensive second team big man in Bam Adebayo who's good at guarding Giannis, and they just have a lot of shooters that can kind of go against the Bucks. They forced Middleton to make some big plays, and to his credit, he really did step up in their one win in that series. But the Heat were just kind of the perfect antidote for the Bucks. And when Giannis went down, that really kind of sealed their fate there. However, obviously, what you and me are here to talk about with this series isn't how it went. It's what the future implications are.
Right, the long-term implications, yeah. So you're done talking about the series already? You want to go straight into that?
I'll talk about the series a little bit. You're right, because I got to give props to some people. For one, Chris Middleton did a good job in that win. He really stepped up there. However, I do still think he's an all-star player, but I'm much less confident in him and Bledsoe and Brook Lopez even as the second and third best pieces on a championship team.
Yeah, that's something we discussed when we did our Eastern Conference playoff preview.
And I obviously felt a lot differently than I do now. I've kind of taken a step back there. However, just to throw an early name out there for when we start doing some preseason stuff for next year, or I guess this year when the season begins in a couple months. I've heard CJ McCollum to the Bucks would be a very interesting trade. Very interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different movement possibilities, and I think we'll get into that in the next few weeks as more and more rumors begin to come out. Obviously, a lot of the news is surrounding Chris Paul, which I don't know why you'd trade for a 35-year-old, trade a lot of your assets to match a $45 million salary of a 35-year-old to please a 25-year-old on an expiring deal. That doesn't really make sense to me. But again, we can break that down in the coming weeks. But as far as the Bucks, what is their flexibility? They have a few expiring deals, but really, if they're, they have to really move Middleton or Bledsoe, where can they go? Who can they move?
The first thing to address, obviously, is social media, as always with basketball, is
it's reactionary.
It's reactionary. It's like a big pile of wood soaked in gasoline. It takes one little incident on the court to make everybody on Twitter freak out. And we've absolutely seen that with Giannis. I know everyone's there's a ton of memes which oh, Giannis is making the face LeBron made before he left the Cavaliers. There is a vast difference between their two situations. Yes, none of them have had the playoff success they wanted, but there's a big difference between Middleton and Bledsoe and Brook Lopez and DiVincenzo and Coach Budenholzer than what LeBron had to deal with before he left the Cavs when he had Larry Hughes and Zydrunas Ilyakas.
Wow, that name is never going to be pronounced correctly.
No,
is
it's
it?
not. Mr.
Zydrunas
Slavic, what is it?
Ilgauskas, for all you literates out there.
Literates? Bro, I don't speak Croatian. No,
Yeah, there
he's
you go.
Lithuanian probably.
Yeah, he's Lithuanian.
But Giannis has a better situation than LeBron did. And I also don't really, I know everyone wants to talk about Giannis leaving, but does he seem like the kind of guy to you who would dip this early?
He doesn't. He seems very loyal, but as we've seen in the past, things happen, time changes things, and maybe another year of subpar playoff performance where he's giving his all and he just doesn't have the pieces around him. Then he goes peacefully in free agency. What I will say to your point is I don't see him being forceful in a trade scenario where he still has time left on his contract. I think he's a very honorable and respectable person, and that doesn't change if he forces a trade. I still think he's given his all to this franchise over 7 years, and they really haven't. You're saying that he's got a better supporting cast than LeBron in his first stint in Cleveland. That doesn't really say much. He doesn't have a lot of support. He needs to be surrounded by shooters, and the Bucks haven't really done a great job of constructing a good team around him. That's not to say they can't be successful, but they have very little flexibility right now.
Well, let me throw this out there though, because if you watch those playoff games, Giannis was arguably one of the bigger problems the Bucks had. He was
his inability to shoot, create, change on the drive,
and that's what I'm saying. The other big differences between him and LeBron. LeBron was just a superstar balling out in his prime in the playoff games. He would be like putting up 30, 40 points a game and still lose. Giannis just really struggled.
And I will say we saw that Giannis for about 11 minutes.
Yeah.
He put up, I think, 19 points in 11 minutes, something completely insane like that in that first quarter. Then after that, he was pretty much done. But I mean, he played good in spurts, but I think you're right. He's limited offensively right now. I don't know if this is something that will continue if he can develop it at all, but he's certainly quite limited. And the team has to be really well constructed around him. And he can be a number one option on a championship team, but the team has to be better constructed than it currently is.
Again, though, that's the big thing for me that people aren't talking about is Giannis did not play to his superstar level, his MVP level. Giannis kind of was the main problem there. I'm not saying the team around him is perfect. I'm not saying that there aren't moves that could be made to help maximize his strengths, but we've seen this in the last couple playoffs. People aren't really talking about it, but Giannis has, whether it's the Raptors or the Heat, if you have an elite coach like that, he's a puzzle it seems like you can solve in the playoffs.
Yeah, and Budenholzer also deserves some type of blame for this series.
He does not like to switch it's frustrating with him because he doesn't like to switch his game plan up that much.
Well, his game plan and his very simplistic defenses, but the thing that drives me more insane is his rotations. He's playing guys regular season minutes. They're down 0-2 to the Heat, and Giannis plays like 34 minutes. I mean, I get maybe...
Yeah, there's the iconic picture where Brook Lopez, he's like, we don't want to overwork Giannis, and Giannis is playing 34, and Brook Lopez played like 40, so...
Yeah, it's very strange. You think you'd want guys to give their all.
I swear with this Hawks team, you'd have that Korver, Teague, Carroll, Millsap, Horford lineup playing like 40 a game, so I don't know what he's doing there.
And if anybody's going to go this offseason, it's Budenholzer, because...
Do you see a Budenholzer leaves, Mike D'Antoni comes in situation?
That would be very interesting to build. And, actually, I hadn't thought about that until now because I was more thinking about the Pacers for D'Antoni because they got some guards that can really ball out.
Sure.
But yeah, and it really all goes back to me as, if D'Antoni, goes to Milwaukee theoretically and builds that system. Okay, with Giannis and around who? What's the game plan here? I really think if this Bucks team, and I really do think it'll falter, it'll fall apart, and whether Giannis stays there his whole career and never wins a championship because of this system, or if he moves somewhere else and wins a championship, or whatever the case may be, I think the downfall of Milwaukee in its currently built state is not re-signing Malcolm Brogdon. I think that is really...
Absolutely.
A guy who can shoot and handle and take the pressure off of Giannis, and you decided... to spend that money elsewhere on Eric Bledsoe, a guard who really can't shoot.
To his credit, Bledsoe did just make his second all-defensive team.
But that's not a weakness the Bucks have, though. They have defense in spades. They really need shooting.
Well, the big thing too is Dante DiVincenzo has become such a great defender. He really neutralized. He kind of makes. If they had waited another year on it, Bledsoe kind of is spelled irrelevant by DiVincenzo, because if DiVincenzo can do what Bledsoe can do, then they would have been better off keeping Brogdon. They'd have a younger team. They'd have a cheaper team.
Yeah. I have no clue why they let Brogdon walk. I think that's going to be the downfall. If Giannis leaves, I think we're going to look back at that as the initial point. And this playoffs will certainly be, a key turning point. But that Brogdon, not re-signing Brogdon, letting him walk to Indiana, that's certainly the catalyst, the beginning of all this. So let's move on to the Western Conference, where both of the LA teams look to be in control of their respective semifinal matchups. And I really would be hard-pressed to believe that either team could lose their series. But who do you think is in more trouble? Again, I don't think either of them are going to lose. I don't think you do either. But who do you think will be pushed the furthest? Which team can do the most harm to one of these LA teams?
Look, it's going to be one of those series where you look at it and you're looking at Wikipedia in 5 years, and you're like, oh wow, the Nuggets and Rockets each pushed the LA teams to 6. That must have been quite the series. And then you look back, you're like, okay, Nuggets stole a couple games. Clippers were, but no one ever really thought the Clippers were any danger. Same thing for the Rockets, Lakers. It's going to be a long series, but I don't think it's ever going to be that uncomfortable for either of the LA teams. They might lose a few. It might be a tough series, but it's not really going to be that much of a strain on them. The Lakers are the ones that are more interesting to watch right now, obviously, because with the Lakers, they really need, it seems like for them to do that well, they kind of need some random bench guy like Rondo last night to step up and play above his level for them to succeed. Because the Rockets gave him a good game last night.
I certainly think both of these series will be done in 5 or 6. I really don't see either of them getting pushed to 7 unless Houston starts shooting lights out or Jamal Murray returns to his Jazz series form. But the one thing I'd rather focus on, other than these pretty predictable series out here in the West at this point, is, just look at how deep the West is. Really, Denver is a very, very solid team. Houston is not really playing at their peak, but they've been spectacular at times this season. And then, a team that the Clippers also, banished to the offseason, Dallas, and Portland played really well. And Phoenix was on fire in the bubble.
Oh, there's so many.
And the Warriors are going to come back.
Warriors are coming back. If you look at Sacramento and Phoenix, they're both right on the edge of being a playoff team. The Jazz still have...
Right, didn't mention the Jazz
The Jazz
either.
will have Bojan back. The Pelicans obviously have a lot of potential right now. They got overhyped. You're seeing, Bleacher Report said they had the best starting 5 in the bubble, which was...
It's crazy. I will say, if you're a free agent this offseason, and you're looking for a short-term contract to wait for the cap to go back up, sign in the East on a short-term deal, get yourself an all-star appearance, and get loaded. The West is scary, and we agree this season the LA teams are on top. Not sure what next season or the seasons in the future hold, but man, is the West scary. So, if you're going back to that Giannis conversation, the fact that he can't even get to the Eastern Conference Finals right now as the MVP and what we both admit is a very flawed but solid supporting cast, it's a detriment to Giannis. What would he be doing in the first round matching up against the Mavericks or the Lakers or the Clippers? Or even the Nuggets. The Nuggets, man, they are a really good team. That's the one thing I'm realizing. The fact that Michael Porter Jr. is going to be the third option for them next year.
There's room to improve with the Nuggets too.
Oh, yeah. That's the scariest thing, the potential.
I feel like Millsap is gone, but that they could get a little better from that as they trust Porter more.
He's just a piece.
Bol still has a lot of potential.
That's the next
and honestly,
one, too.
The one thing with Millsap, too, and don't take this me dissing Millsap, because he's a classic throwback player. We saw him go from a face-up classic forward to being he can space the floor now. He's a hard worker. He's an all-star.
Yeah, he's still got some... But some time left in the league. His time with the
Nuggets might be over, though, just because they brought him in for Jokic.
Yeah,
to help Jokic and Murray and Gary Harris, back when people thought Gary Harris was going to be good. They brought Millsap in to help these guys become playoff leaders.
I could certainly see that, because
Murray has taken over, and Jokic, they lost, but Jokic 32 and 18.
Yeah, they're going to want to re-sign Jeremy Grant, too, so they're going to need the space for that. So let's quickly shift back to the East and just discuss the other semifinal matchup. Now, at the time of recording, Boston is currently up 3-2. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon, and the game is in the evening. My belief is that the Celtics have been the far superior team this series, and so we're just going to go off the assumption that they're going to be winning this series. Did the Raptors fail, or are the Celtics for real?
Homer. All jokes aside about your Boston homerism, it's a little bit of both. The Celtics have been excellent. The Raptors, my boy Spicy P, really has struggled. Van Vliet struggled a bit, but I think you're a bit preemptive to count them out just yet. I mean, it's Toronto, dude.
Go ahead and put up a little note that says Marko was right, and that the Celtics absolutely destroyed the Raptors in 6. If not, I'm pretty sure they'll win in 7. It'll look bad for me, I'll admit. If
Paul,
the Celtics...
go ahead and put a note that says, get that old file picture me, put a little speech bubble there, and say Homer. All jokes aside, I mean, we are about the theatrics. I got to rib you a bit there, but no, I've been impressed by Boston. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum play so well together. Kemba Walker's really kind of coming to his own. Gordon Hayward's going to be back, and Gordon...
That's a big one for
17,
Boston.
17 points a game. Gordon was so underrated this year. And then I got to give him a little shout-outs here and there. So I'll give a shout-out to a player near and dear to your heart, Marko, Daniel Tice.
Good European
Super
player.
Underrated, yeah.
Yeah.
He's
also,
gritty.
Robert Williams has emerged, too.
Tice can suddenly score. He's gritty. He's tough. He's really kind of that glue guy you need because the Celtics are one of those teams. One problem that my Dallas Mavericks had was every team needs that big guy who's going to come in and we saw Marcus Morris and Montrezl Harrell shove Luka around and throw him around all game. Every team needs a guy like Daniel Tice or Steven Adams, even if they're not at their level, who will come in and just who would come in and punch Marcus Morris in the face. Or something.
Right.
Every team needs that guy. Boston, no offense to your core 4 guys, your Walker, your Tatum.
They're not the biggest. They're not the toughest.
None of those guys are tough guys. They could get pushed around, but you got guys like Tice who are going to come in there and do their thing.
And one last point I just want to make about the Celtics. It will be a god travesty if Marcus Smart ends his career without a Defensive Player of the Year award.
I'd agree.
I mean...
The only reason he can get a Defensive Player of the Year is because people don't like to give him to guards.
Right. They want to give it to the big men, but I will point out, I don't have the numbers on me right now because I'm just spouting, but if you look at the per 48, I'm sure Marcus Smart is probably one of the best big defenders. Even though he's 6'4", he locks down centers. He's a fighter. And he honestly, even if his stats don't show a bunch of stuff going on in the box score, he makes every single play that's of importance. Deflections, diving on the floor, locking down, closing out, every little thing he does to a T, and he is the heart and soul of this Boston team.
Let me say 2 more things about this series. One, I think you're just a little too critical on Toronto. They've had some bad games, but I don't think anyone should ever count the Raptors out. This isn't me. I've never at this point said that they will win. They're going to win. They should win. I've just said, I think you dismiss them a little too easily. The way they're coached with the players they have, I'm not saying it's going to happen. Let's be honest, though. They've already won 2 straight.
They've looked lost. They've looked completely lost at times in this series. They've been completely outmatched and outplayed in games 1, 2, and 5. And game 3, to their credit, they fought hard and came back, but they could have also lost that one. They've been outclassed and outplayed in 4 out of 5 games, and I'm sure game 6 will be the final one of the series. And I'll just say this.
I'm just saying I could see Toronto winning those 2 games again. I don't think they will.
Marcus All eventually got benched at the end of game 5 or about halfway through the 3rd. They started bringing on Matt Thomas and Chris Boucher, and I think they'll probably roll with that in game 6. Again, Gasol has been a shell of his former self at this point. But I think you're right.
Well, that's my second point, by the way, Marko. If we're looking at just the playoffs later this year and long term, aside from Smart, the Celtics bench, if I was you, I would be absolutely terrified of that bench of yours.
Fair enough.
You might have the worst bench left in the playoffs.
That's a solid claim. When Hayward gets back, there'll be Marcus Smart, Brad Wanamaker, Robert Williams, Romeo Langford. Not very solid, I'll be honest. But I tend to believe that starting 5, when rotated correctly, when you've got 3 or 4 of those guys on the court at the same time, they're very solid for a full 48.
Marko, if I wasn't a massive basketball nerd, I would not know who Wanamaker was or Robert Williams.
Brad Wanamaker has had a tremendous series against the Raptors. He's played better than Fred VanVleet the entire series with probably half the minutes.
Seriously, dude, like if you guys lose another starter or one of you guys has an off night, like Jason Tatum had a really bad game 3 there.
Yeah, Tatum had a terrible game 4.
I'm just saying, I don't see your bench being able to support the team for a long period of time. I think
yeah, that's a fair point. They got to build in free agency after this year.
Playing serious minutes, and also the risk with you guys is I don't know how you can build in free agency because you have Hayward's on a big contract.
Yeah, there's no
Tatum's
cap.
on a big contract. Kemba's on a big contract.
Well,
you guys got to keep Jaylen Brown.
This has turned into a very existential conversation about the Boston Celtics.
Good,
but as far as the series is concerned,
be afraid, Marko.
I think the consensus is the Raptors really didn't play very well.
No, they did not.
During most of the series. I mean, yeah, they've looked really outplayed.
I think
the Celtics haven't even shot that well, to be honest.
The Raptors could be a quick fix though in the offseason.
Yeah.
But I still think Pascal Siakam, again, Tatum played better in the playoffs, but Pascal Siakam had a better overall season than him. Kyle Lowry's looked very good in his age.
Kyle Lowry's done though, basically. I mean, he's 35 next season. Him and Gasol are 35.
100 times, Marko. I've had it up to here with this Kyle Lowry slander.
I don't trust Kyle Lowry.
Unfounded.
He's too old. I mean, he's still a great player right now, but I mean, he's been god awful in this series. He's shot terribly. He's been a nuisance on defense for the Raptors themselves. I mean, he's picked up fouls like crazy.
Hey man,
and him and Gasol on the court at the same time defending the pick and roll. Boston has completely shredded it. But I will say,
you have Anunoby.
Right, they have a young core that is they can totally build on it.
Serge is only like 30 or 32.
Really? I mean, I guess he really, when he was brought into the league with the Thunder, he made an impact right away, which really confuses your perception of a dude's age.
I thought he was Marko Sol's age.
Yeah. Yeah, Marko Sol is a dinosaur. Oh my God.
He's an old boy. He had a nice he's always been one of my favorite players. And he had a nice little turnaround when he started shooting threes, but Gasol's time of playing major minutes is probably over.
Oh yeah. And this series has probably been the nail in the coffin. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining me in a discussion about the playoffs and about Giannis and the Bucks, and a very bloated discussion about futures of NBA teams that we can't even quite get to yet until the end of the season. But thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Enjoy your game, Homer. Seriously, Marko, great to be here, man.
Yeah, of course. And so with that, we're going to bring in Tim Seipel and move right into our AFC division winner predictions. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just ready to have football tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So let's move right into those AFC division winners with your pick for the AFC East.
For the first time since 1995, the Buffalo Bills will win the AFC East. As the Patriots have lost a lot of players on the defensive and offensive end, the Bills have a great shot at first in this division, as they have added Stephon Diggs on the offensive end, which will be a great weapon for them, and a pure number one wide receiver. I mean, they struggled with having only John Brown and a couple other...
Cole Beasley.
Yeah, Cole Beasley, but not anybody that's super flashy that will really garner the respect of the number one corner on the other team. So, I mean, with the addition of him and Josh Allen improving even more, and with the best defense, one of the best defenses in the league, I think the Bills are definitely a title contender and the division winner.
So I think this division is probably the closest in football. And with Jarrett Stidham starting, it's a clear win for the Bills. But Cam Newton, he just brings like a different flexibility to the offense that Bill Belichick has never had. And I think, honestly, the way they're going to be able to run this offense, Josh McDaniels is going to have a field day. The defense is going to be significantly weaker, but it was second in the NFL last season and first in many other metrics. Again, the Bills are right up there, so it's going to be tough. But honestly, Cam Newton's a veteran. I trust him. And more than anything, I think Belichick, if this was the time to prove himself as one of the greatest coaches of all time, it's not going to be a 12 or 13 win team. It might not even be a 10 win team, but I think they'll just have enough. Again, this division is really, really tight. I think people are really overlooking the Dolphins. I mean, the Dolphins are going to be a great team. Even if Fitzpatrick starts, I think they're going to be a pretty solid team. But I think the Patriots will squeak by in this division just on Bill Belichick just willing this team to victory with his tactics and his coaching. It's probably not a popular pick, but I mean, I cannot bring myself yet to go against Bill Belichick. And again, it's a tough pick. Certainly the Bills are not a wrong choice either. So let's move into the AFC North with your pick.
Yeah, I think this one is one of the easier ones. You got the Baltimore Ravens. The only main loss for them was Marshall Yanda to retirement, one of their offensive linemen. But that was mainly all that they lost, and they added to their running game with J.K. Dobbins from the draft. And then they ended up getting Patrick Queen for a steal late in the first round to fill in the main gap in their defense, which has been their linebackers. Pro Bowler Calais Campbell and veteran Derek Wolfe have been added as well to help on the defensive line. And honestly, this team has just gotten better somehow. And I don't see them losing in the first game in the playoffs like they did this past year. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the league for sure.
Yeah, the AFC North is probably the second or third toughest division in football, but it just is just as impressive that the Ravens are this far ahead in this division that is this challenging. They're a really good team. The Browns and the Steelers are very solid opponents that they'll play twice a year. But I have to go with the Ravens. I think they probably have the most talented roster in the AFC, just position by position. I mean, they just have a bunch of guys. And I know that the Chiefs obviously, went to the Super Bowl because they executed better and they clearly have the better quarterback and coach. But when you break it down position by position, this Ravens team is very dangerous all over the field. It showed in their Pro Bowl selections. I mean, they had guys from every position group, and they're a very well-rounded team.
Yeah, I think the main difference between the Ravens and the Chiefs getting to the Super Bowl was that the Chiefs had a real sense of leadership and experience.
And
so
a
that
better
when they were
quarterback.
down, well, a better quarterback as well, but when they were down by a lot, the Chiefs were able to come back. The Chiefs were down by a lot in the first couple games.
Yeah.
And when the Ravens were down, they just weren't able to climb back into the game.
This is slightly off topic, but I think the Ravens will probably finish with the 1 seed because the Chiefs might have a Super Bowl hangover, be a bit lackadaisical, but the Ravens have a lot to prove. They were really embarrassed for back-to-back seasons in the playoffs. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to go 16-0, but I can certainly see them repeating as going 14-2. They're going to play really aggressive. Because you're right, they are terrible playing from behind, so they have to get out and ahead early, and they'll do that often. So let's move to a very up-in-the-air division, AFC South.
Yeah, I mean, over the past couple years, it's been the Texans division, and I really think that the Texans are going to take a big decline here. Their offensive line is not good. They lost one of the best wide receivers in the league to a trade for David Johnson, which was an absolute bust this past year. So I'm not really sure how they didn't really improve over the offseason. They really took a big decline. So I'm going to have to go with the Titans in this one. I think the run game with Derrick Henry, being able to keep Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry in the same offseason, as well as having a developing A.J. Brown, and their defense has been great. And with Jadeveon Clowney, oh man, it's only going to get better. I just don't see the Colts or the Texans catching up to these two. This one.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Texans are in a complete decline, and I don't know where all this Colts hype is coming from. Did anybody watch the Chargers last season? Phillip Rivers is in a massive decline, and all he's got is rookies everywhere, and then a pretty solid offensive line. He has nothing offensively as far as established weapons.
Offensive lines in the league.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Other than that, though, it's a lot of young guys, and I just don't trust Phillip Rivers at all right now.
I think we are underestimating what a really good offensive line will do for even a mediocre quarterback.
Yeah, I just don't trust Phillip Rivers, and I way more thoroughly trust Ryan Tannehill. He's not exactly the prototypical quarterback you'd want that can put you, he'll put you on his back and carry you into through a victory, but they're a run-heavy team. They're just completely loaded on the defensive end, and I think the Titans will go to the playoffs again. I mean, who's to know? I mean, they might finish 9-7 for a 4th straight year, but honestly, that would probably be enough to win this division in my eyes. So let's move on to a pretty obvious one. We mentioned it a bit earlier, but the AFC West.
Yeah, I mean, the Chiefs. I mean, how much more do I even have to say? I know Paul's happy with that one, but
yeah, Chiefs.
I mean,
pretty
they extended
simple,
a bunch of their players over this offseason up to the 2022 season. So they're going to have their main keystone players for a couple more years, at least. I think the Chiefs are the new Patriots. The Chiefs are the new dynasty in the AFC. And as the Patriots are declining a little bit, I think we're going to see the Chiefs fill that void and just dominate in the AFC.
And they'll certainly have a battle, much in the way the Patriots had Peyton Manning. The Chiefs will have Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, and I agree with you. They will absolutely dominate the Western Division for the next decade and be a prominent figure in the AFC and most possibly the Super Bowl for the next 10 years, if not more.
For sure. And it doesn't help that it does help that they have one of the worst divisions in right now with the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Broncos. I just don't see any of those teams even making a wild card spot.
Yeah, so speaking of wild card spots, let's transition into picking our NFL wild card predictions. Now, we didn't do the NFC wild cards when we did the division leaders last week, so let's do the NFC seeds first. Obviously, if you don't recall, the NFL has added an extra wildcard seed starting this season. So we're doing wildcard seeds 5, 6, and 7 in the NFC. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, with my fifth one in the NFC, I have the Buccaneers. With the Saints winning the division, I think the Bucs are a pretty clear favorite for one of the wildcard spots. As you know, obviously you have Tom Brady. They even added Leonard Fournette over the past couple weeks. I think where I see them struggling the most is on the defensive end, especially in the passing game. And that's where that's going to be their kryptonite. But for the most part right now, I mean, the Bucs are a great team offensively and have an extremely insane amount of weapons.
Yeah, so and then 5, you've got the Buccaneers. Who do you have at 6 and 7?
Yeah, so at 6, I have the 49ers. I think they have kind of a down year, especially with the Super Bowl. I think they're going to be in a little bit of a haze at first, but I do think that they secure that 6th spot. And then in the 7th spot, I have the Vikings. With the Packers winning the division for me, I think the Vikings end up getting that 7th seed. I just don't see how well they're going to do without Stephon Diggs and without a second real good wide receiver. We'll see how Justin Jefferson adjusts after getting drafted, but for right now, I have him at 7.
All right, so my NFC division winners in the East, I had the Cowboys. In the North, I had the Vikings. In the South, I had the Saints. And in the West, I had the 49ers. At 5, I'll have to put the Seahawks. I think they're a very tremendous team. They're very well put together. Just behind them in 6, I have Tampa Bay. I wanted to put Tampa Bay at 5, but they do have a much... I would have to say I think they're going to have a tougher time schedule-wise than the Seahawks. And also, you've got to factor in the fact that Tom Brady will be adjusting to a whole new offense. He didn't exactly get the reps he wanted with this team, and the defense in Tampa Bay is tremendous, but I'm just going to have to go with Seattle just a hair ahead of Tampa Bay. So I've got Seattle at 5, I've got Tampa Bay at 6, and at 7, I threw a bunch of teams around in my head. I really had a handful of teams that I considered for this, but 7, I have to go with Philadelphia. I just feel like even if the half of the team is healthy, they will themselves into the playoffs. They have a grit and an intensity and a tremendous defense. And if Carson Wentz is healthy for even half the season, I think they can sneak in, also considering they're probably in the weakest division in the NFL. So those are our wild card teams for the NFC. So why don't you just give a quick rundown of your AFC division winners, even though we just did it, and then go through your 5, 6, and 7 seeds.
Yeah, so in the East, I have the Bills. In the North, I have the Ravens. In the South, I have the Titans. And then in the West, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. And then in that 5th spot in the wild card, I have the Steelers. We obviously talked about how the Ravens are going to win a really tough division with, the Browns and the Steelers coming up behind them. But I think the Steelers' defense was phenomenal last year, and they're only going to get better for me. So I'm going to have to go with the Steelers because they're going to be able to be really good on the defensive end, and then we'll see how they do with Big Ben coming back on the offensive end of the game. And then in the 6th seed, I have the Patriots. I know at first kind of iffy whether or not Tom Brady leaving the Patriots will cripple the Patriots, but I think the addition of Cam Newton was extremely useful, as you can do a lot with him. And that is scary to think about with Bill Belichick as the head coach. Obviously, the defensive end, a defensive side of things, we already talked about that. It's not going to be real great for them, but I do think that Cam Newton will be able to do a lot that Bill Belichick was not used to having. So they're at 6, and then to round it out at 7, I'm kind of between two teams. I'm between the Titans not Titans, between the Texans and the Colts. I really like the Colts because of the offensive line that they have, along with, they're going to have a really good run game with Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. You have T.Y. Hilton. You're just getting a lot from the offensive end, and then the defensive end is not lacking. You have a really good defense for the Colts. I think a top 10 defense easily. I really think that the Colts are going to be able to pull it out.
Yeah, so my wild card picks, just to run back my division winners in the East. I had the Patriots. In the North, I had the Ravens. In the South, I had the Titans. And in the West, I had the Kansas City Chiefs. Now at 5, I've got the Buffalo Bills. I think that they're probably going to be the best wild card team. I do think Josh Allen is still a few years away from being where he needs to be as a playoff quarterback. I think he has a lot to improve on. But the rest of the team around him is, as you mentioned earlier, championship ready. It's about whether he can step up or not. And he's still very young, and he still likes to take off before he gets through the rest of his reads. And I think he still needs a few more years. There's nothing wrong with that. I think this is just his 3rd or 4th season. And so he still has plenty of time, and this core is young. So the Bills will be good for years to come. 6, I have Pittsburgh. I think people are discounting Pittsburgh because of Ben Roethlisberger, and probably rightfully so. I don't know if he finishes the season, but honestly, this defense is good enough, and he's got skill positions. The offensive line is deteriorating and aging, but they still have a solid running back in James Conner. So I think there's just enough around Big Ben that they can slide into that 6th spot. And I agree with you, the 7th spot in the AFC, it's up for grabs for anybody, to be honest with you. I considered a number of teams, like, for instance, you said those AFC South teams and the Colts and the Texans. There's potential there. I really don't think anyone from the AFC East can get in. And I really want to put Cleveland in there, but the fact that they have to play Baltimore and the Steelers twice, and also there's a lot of drama, and I'm not sure I trust Baker Mayfield. So I'm going to go with a bit of a surprise one in the West. I was going to put the Broncos, but seeing Von Miller go down injured, I know it's just one guy, but he's a big impact guy. So I'm actually going to go with the Chargers. It feels weird to go with the Chargers, and I really don't trust it. I honestly really I was going to pick Denver before the Von Miller injury, but it's season ending, and Drew Lock is young. Tyrod Taylor is a veteran mobile quarterback, and I tend to trust him, and he's got good weapons around him on offense, and the defense tends to get injured, but I think I don't know. I think it's just time for them to get lucky. The Chargers have been really unlucky these past few seasons, and I have to say, I think the Chargers could finally, they're not going to go far in the playoffs. They'll probably lose in the first round, but I think they'll have a decent season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the Chargers are a team that's kind of a wild card. You don't really know what you're going to get. And I think Tyrod Taylor, I remember, if I remember correctly, the last time he played, he didn't do real great. He was kind of below average. So we'll see what kind of Tyrod Taylor we're going to be getting this season.
Right. You get the Tyrod Taylor that's an interception party, or the guy that leads the Bills to the playoffs in the most random season ever. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty with this 7th seed now. You can have a team that could start like 0-4 or like 1-5 and slide on in there with like an 8-8 record. There's obviously the potential for some really mediocre teams to get on in there, especially in the AFC, when there's really not as much competition below the top 2 to 4 teams. Tim, thank you so much for joining us this week and talking some NFL.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so yeah, let's move right into our weekly pick'ems with Paul Hires. Paul, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Here in Nebraska, the weather has been pretty inconsistent, so we went from about 103 to about 33 in 2 days, but it's been good. It's been good.
That great Nebraska weather. Well, you know who doesn't have trouble with their weather? The people down in the bubble, in the NBA bubble down in Orlando. So we're going to preemptively pick the Eastern Conference Finals. We're recording this in the early afternoon of Wednesday, so we're not sure of the result of Game 6 Raptors-Celtics, but if you've been watching the whole episode, you'll certainly have seen the result based on something Paul will put on a slide, whether me or Will was right. So let's just hop into it. Miami Heat versus the Boston Celtics in the NBA Eastern Conference Finals. Jared picked the Heat. Joseph went with the Celtics. Tim and Will also going with the Heat. Paul, who's your pick?
And once again, I'm just going to point out that Toronto is still alive and well as we speak. So let's not count them out. They did win the finals last year, but I don't think it's going to matter. I think the Heat take this one. I think they've just got so many players on their team that it just amazed me just watching some of their games. Like, anyone on their roster can hit a three, and very good too. I mean, you talk about Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero and Goran Dragic and Crowder and Bam Adebayo, and just a lot of team players. And let's not forget Jimmy Butler. I mean, just everyone on that team is really proficient at hitting those shots, and I think they miss like maybe 2 or 3 free throws in every game against the Bucks. They've just been that good, and I think their offensive attack is just going to be too much for either the Celtics or Toronto.
And I hear everything you're saying about the Heat. They have tremendous depth, and they play within a great offensive system. But I think the Celtics also play within a great offensive system under Brad Stevens. And I think the X factor in this series is Gordon Hayward's return. He's not going to be 100%, but when you look at the Celtics versus the Heat, the Celtics, if Gordon Hayward's healthy, they have, 4 out of the 6 best players. And, while Miami definitely has the advantage as far as depth is concerned, Boston's roster is a lot more top heavy. Boston, I believe, has the best player in the series, Jason Tatum. And I don't really think that's just, that's not really up for debate. And I just tend to trust those, like I did with the Toronto series, those 2 or 3 or 4 best players for Boston. Again, earlier in the episode, Will talked about the depth issue for Boston. It's certainly a problem. But with Brad Wanamaker and Robert Williams stepping up, it's less of an issue. So I'll have to go with Boston on this one. So now finally, we're back in the NFL. Moving into our NFL pick'ems, we're all very excited. So the first matchup is the first game of the year. Will probably already be played by the time this episode comes out. But nonetheless, we got the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Thursday, 7:15 on NBC. Jared, Joseph, Tim, Will, Paul, and Marko all picking the Chiefs. It's a clean sweep. I don't even
and you knew that was going to happen.
Spoiling it for everybody, but yeah.
But I mean, let's take a look. I mean, defending Super Bowl champs now. And man, this feels so good to be a Kansas City fan. But let's try and be a little bit less biased here. I mean, the Texans, you guys mentioned it. Losing DeAndre Hopkins is not a good move for them, and it almost just seems like they've taken a step back from last year. And now with the Titans coming in, I don't even know if they're going to win the division in the South. And then you look at the Chiefs. You guys mentioned it in previous episodes. I think one of the best off seasons of any of the NFL teams. Just great picking up Clyde Edwards-Helaire for that running back position, and their defense coming back stronger than last year. And let's not forget the Chiefs always start out strong. We remember that Patriots blowout a few years ago in the first game of the season. I think the Chiefs get the win, and they kick off the season in a good way.
All right, so our next matchup, it's an NFC North battle. The Green Bay Packers at the Minnesota Vikings, Sunday at noon on Fox. Jared and Joseph going with the Packers, as will Tim and Will. Paul, your pick.
Yeah, and I got to go Green Bay on this one. I think I've mentioned it in the past. I think Aaron Rodgers is just the superior quarterback to Kirk Cousins. But not only that, I think the Packers have really proven that they can work in an offensive scheme under Matt LaFleur. I think last year let's be honest, they kind of got lucky in some of those games to get the 2 seed. But I think this year, with that experience in that offensive attack, I think the Packers can really strive. I think the Vikings are kind of inconsistent still. They might be asleep for this one. I got to go Green Bay.
And so I got to prevent the back-to-back clean sweeps. I'm going with Minnesota. Legacy-wise and overall in their career, I think Aaron Rodgers is far and away better than Kirk Cousins. But last season, Kirk Cousins was better than Rodgers. And I think Rodgers is on a slight decline, as would any quarterback at the age of 38. And I tend to think that despite losing Stephon Diggs, that Kirk Cousins has the better offense around him. Jordan Love isn't going to go out and play wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. So yeah, I'll go with Minnesota. It's not a confident pick, but why not? Minnesota. So next up, we've got an AFC North battle. Got the Cleveland Browns at the Baltimore Ravens, Sunday noon on CBS. Jared going with the Browns, believe it or not. Mr. DeHaan, confident in his picks. And then Joseph, Tim, and Will all going with the Ravens. Who's your pick, Paul?
Yeah, and I got to agree with that. I mean, I just think Lamar Jackson is going to come out and he's going to be, like you said before, just looking for a redemption from last season and really want to bring it to every game. I think they're bringing some good pieces back on defense as well. And let's be honest, the Browns, I just don't know if they have what it takes. I think they will be better this year, but I got to go with the Ravens in this one.
Totally agree with you. They're going to come out firing, considering the back-to-back seasons of postseason failure. I mentioned it in our division picks. The Ravens are going to be on fire. They're going to be very motivated, very angry, and they're going to come out and really take it to the Browns. So I'm going with Baltimore on that one. And then another divisional matchup and another hotly contested game. Got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints, Sunday, 3:30 p.m. on Fox. Jared, Joseph, and Tim all going with the Saints, and Will confidently going with Tampa Bay. Paul, your pick.
Yeah, and in this one, I look at the defenses, and I think that Saints defense is going to just outplay. I'm not really buying into the Tom Brady hype. I might regret that statement here.
He is 43 years old.
He might be good, but I just don't see it at this point. I don't know what the coaching, how that's going to affect his gameplay, and just the change of team. I mean, he was at the Patriots for 18, 19 seasons or something like that.
20 seasons.
20
a crazy
seasons.
Amount. Two
So,
whole decades.
I mean, maybe just the change of atmosphere might be a different feel for him, especially on the first game of the season versus Drew Brees, who's we know has been there at New Orleans for so long. And I just, I love the Buccaneers front seven. I think they're really going to do good this season.
Yeah, best rushing defense in the league.
But that back end, the passing defense, not quite there yet. I think Drew Brees and the Saints take this one on the passing end.
I completely concur with you. They will shred this Tampa Bay secondary, and they will, the Tampa Bay secondary will get absolutely shredded 16 out of 16 games. They're just not good. That front seven was the number one rushing defense in the league. They probably will be again. They've even added some pieces. And the offense will certainly improve, considering Tom Brady will more than likely not throw 30 interceptions. Here's a fun little stat for you. Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions last season. Tom Brady has thrown 30 interceptions in the past 4 seasons. So, it's going to be a big change of pace.
For a stretch of one, but yeah, I mean, that's just unbelievable to think about 30 interceptions in one season. Wow.
But yeah, that all being said, I'm picking the Saints. This offense is ridiculous, and the defense is not far behind. So yeah, that is it for our weekly pick'ems. Probably next week we'll have accumulated enough picks that we might start doing a little bit of stat time. What do you think of the return of that, maybe?
Yes, maybe a couple more weeks. We're waiting on a couple of NBA series to finish up.
Yeah, the series are tough, considering, just based on when we record and the fact that they play every other day. It's a bit tough, but yeah, we're hanging in there with those.
Yep, everyone should be in the win column after Kansas City takes care of business. So,
well, at least they'll have that. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, you too. Have a good one.
All right, and so we've got a little bit more left to go on the show, so hang on there with us. And next, we're going to bring in Joseph Rena, and we're going to talk some European soccer. And first, Joe, we're going to go ahead and talk some Premier League. So how are you doing, Joe?
Happy to be here. Let's talk some Prem.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. Just run down some players to watch in the Premier League this season for me here in England.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1, just named the PFA Player of the Year, Kevin De Bruyne. I don't think there's any other place to start. He was instrumental in Manchester City's second place run, but he was just phenomenal all season. 35 appearances, 13 goals as a midfielder, and 20 assists is unbelievable for him. Another player I think you should watch out for, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang from Arsenal. Him, Lacazette, and Pepe, that front three is just deadly when they're all firing. It is kind of rare. Let me just preface that. But he did have 20 goals this last season, only bettered by Jamie Vardy. So I think that if he keeps that up, he could be pretty fun to watch for the Arsenal. Next up, we got Mason Greenwood, 18 years old. This guy is younger than us, and he's playing for Manchester United. He only made 9 appearances, but they were all pretty much after the restart, and he had 5 goals and 1 assist. He got some really high praise from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who said that he was one of the most natural finishers that he's ever met in his life. And for an 18-year-old, he can only get better, so I think expect some good things from him this season if he can get some good playing time, which I think he will. And lastly, Christian Pulisic of Chelsea. Obviously, I'm an American. I'm a little biased, but I cannot wait to see him. Rumors are coming out that he is going to be handed the number 10 shirt this year since Willian left. And with him, he had 25 appearances, 9 goals, 4 assists for Chelsea. And anyone who saw his game against Liverpool just knows how good he can be. His assist, where he got past basically their entire left side and defense, and then laid it right on a platter for, I believe it was Hudson-Odoi. Yeah, he was just fantastic. And then his goal was phenomenal as well. Yeah. So I think that he'll be something to watch.
Some great players to watch in the Prem. And why don't you just quick run down some exciting first week action from the Premier League?
Yeah, not much, honestly, this week. We only have Liverpool, who are playing against Leeds, which is exciting because Leeds, it's their first game back in the Prem since 2003, 2004. Leeds has been one of the best teams in England, but many people who are, our age, who weren't around before they were in the Prem, don't know that. They're a very, very strong team, rivals with Manchester United, just to show you how powerful they were back in the day. So it's their first game back. They did win the championship, so they'll be excited to start the season off well, but I'm not hopeful for that. I think you should expect a big Liverpool win.
Yeah, and so let's just go right into some way too early predictions. So why don't you give me your 3 relegation candidates, and I'll give you mine.
Absolutely. So my first 3 picks that I would say would be West Brom, Brighton, and Southampton. The 3 of them have not really done much in the transfer market, and I just look across their squads top to bottom, and they are just not as good as you really think they should be to compete in the Premier League. And then I also would not be surprised with Crystal Palace and Fulham. Just, usually you'll get 1 or 2 teams that just go right up and then come back down. And I think you're going to see that with West Brom, and I wouldn't be surprised with Fulham either.
Yeah, so I would agree. I would go with West Brom, Fulham, and I'm going to say Aston Villa. I think there's a good potential there, but Crystal Palace is a team that's finished somewhere between about, 11th, 12th, even down to 15th. But like the past 5 or 6 years, they've been a very solid mid-table squad, bottom-table squad, but have stayed up for quite a while. But I agree with you. There's a whole host of teams. It's certainly not as obvious as the top of the table as far as who's going down. So why don't you run down your top 4 for me then?
Okay. This is kind of a controversial list.
As is mine.
You know what? I'll take it. Number 4, Manchester United. What I saw from them this year was a little bit more consistency than they've seen, or than they've had, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years. They have always been, at least since Fergie left, they've been one of those teams where they're hot one week and not the next. And there's still that to some extent, but they are showing that consistency to get a result when they need to, which is very promising for them. They did improve a little bit with Van de Beek, but not much else. They haven't dropped. I really think that they're just going to drop 1 spot, but still get European football next season.
Yeah, so I agree with you with Manchester United at 4. I certainly think that the spending of Chelsea and Manchester United has thoroughly shut the door on anyone outside of the top 4, the major 4 clubs, sneaking into Champions League football. I think there's a big gap between 4 and 5 this season. I know the big gap was between 1 and 2, and then 2 and 3 this year, and 4 through 8 was basically 5 points. I think that's a lot different this year. I think Manchester United's spending in those specific areas that you mentioned has certainly elevated them as a European level team. I certainly think there's a big distance between the top three and United, but they're certainly in there and will certainly qualify for the Champions League again. Who's your third team?
Third team is their crosstown rivals, Manchester City. Going off of what I saw this last year, 2 years ago, they were unbeatable. Anyone who watched them, just their jaw was on the floor. But this year, they seemed to be figured out. They had a lot of mistakes that cost them games. They weren't getting results that they needed to. And I think that Guardiola is just not changing enough that he needed to. The only real signing that he got was Nathan Ake. And I don't think that you can add a Bournemouth player and
a good
take
Bournemouth player.
He's a good Bournemouth player. He's absolutely good. But I don't think you can add him to a Manchester City team and expect them to win the Prem. That's not the signing for me to take them to the next level. So I don't see them being enough. So I see them dropping one spot as well.
And that's really challenging as far as the Manchester City thing, because they are so dynamic in attack and they can really outscore you. And of course, Chelsea spending a lot, adding to their defense and their attack, and they still will, as I think Manchester City will. But I'm frustrated with the stagnation at Liverpool. I really, again, I'll say this: I've got Liverpool finishing third, but they're probably 5 to 10 points off the top spot. It's not an indictment on Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp to finish third if they score 75 points and Chelsea and Man City score like 80. It's really not that bad. I just think they don't have the squad depth that they really need. And I know they have a bunch of youth guys, Nico Williams and Sepp Vandenberg and Larouci and a few other guys. But I just don't think it's enough right now as far as second team guys. I mean, look at their front three. I mean, who's your second squad? You've got Minamino and Divock Origi and
Shaqiri. Yeah.
Shaqiri. I mean, that's really not a whole lot of depth. And I'm, especially if the Thiago transfer doesn't go through, that midfield's getting really thin considering James Milner is nowhere near what he was even 2 or 3 years ago. So I'll put Liverpool at third, reluctantly.
And I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are upset with that pick. I'm not, because I have them at second. And I think that, first off, I should say, in sports, and especially in the Premier League, champions do not do well in that second season. It's very
tough.
Rare. It is so rare to see a team do as well as they did in their winning campaign to the next season. Everybody's got a target on them now, and I think that people are going to be trying to figure them out, and I think they will. They're a very attacking team, and they showed a lot of weakness, especially after the restart, that they were just a figured out team, and teams could play to their strengths and to Liverpool's weaknesses, and they had no answer. And basically, if Van Dijk isn't playing well, and if Salah isn't playing well, they're a very beatable team. So I have them at second.
Yeah. And another thing with the depth at Liverpool, they haven't replaced Lovren. I think Van de Beek or Gomez, but Gomez has to be on the right sometimes to replace Alexander-Arnold. They're a very thin team. They need to get some transfers in really soon. I mean, they probably will in the winter if they're third or fourth. But anyway, my second team, so I will say this. A week or 2 weeks ago, I would have had Man City, but then I would have had Chelsea, but then they added Thiago Silva, Chilwell. They'll probably replace Kepa, hopefully. And of course, finally got the deal done for Havertz. That just slides City down to second for me. Now, again, City is in the running for a few defenders, maybe some backup players in the attack to help replace Sane and Silva, who they lost this summer. But I do genuinely think City has got a chance at the title. I just don't think, again, they have the depth and the versatility that they did last season. So I got Man City at 2, just behind Chelsea at 1.
Yeah, you spoiled my pick as well. I went with Chelsea, and it does feel kind of weird after the last 2 years, basically, of just domination between Liverpool and Manchester City to see anybody else beating them.
Or even coming within 25 points of them.
Exactly. It's almost unbelievable to think about that. But when you look at their team that they already had, and you add Kai Havertz, Werner, Chilwell, Ziyech, Silva, Sarr, and now potentially Mendy at center back. You look at every spot that they had a weakness, and they just filled it with somebody who's an absolute world beater. So I think that if you are going to bet against anybody, it should not be Chelsea. They are a very dangerous team this year, especially late.
Completely agree with you. And the whole drama back in 2018 when the owner Roman Abramovich could not obtain English citizenship. He's been operating remotely from places in Ukraine and Russia, running the club, and it seemed as though he was even looking for a suitor. And then all of a sudden, he reinvigorates his interest and probably London's interest in Chelsea as a club, and he's really showing his dedication to this team. He's not laying himself down here. And but that's also the other thing. When you spend this much money and you've committed this much, European football is not good enough. They have to win the title. Things could get dicey if at the winter break, Lampard is down, 8, 10, 12 points to Klopp or to Guardiola. So it's going to be tough for Chelsea. A lot more expectations, and the ice may grow thinner due to these transfers. But he certainly has, Lampard, that is, the resources to get this team to the top spot. Just one more quick thing. Who's your top goal scorer?
Top goal scorer? I've heard a lot of different people that have said Werner would be a great pick. Vardy has been just consistently amazing for Leicester because, where else do their goals come from realistically?
Right.
But Aubameyang is also a good shout.
Danny Ings.
Danny Ings, that would be fantastic to see. I don't know if that would happen if Southampton goes down. That would be quite something to see if, a relegated team as the top goal scorer. But no, I don't see that happening. I do see maybe a Harry Kane showing up.
Certainly an option.
He's getting a lot better, especially with Spurs not really getting him much help with them. I think that he could be their pretty much lone goal threat other than Son. But I think Werner is your choice. I think that if Chelsea does get off and running and plays really, really well, he's going to be their focal point that's going to be playing.
I'll say this, Chelsea will probably be the top scoring squad if it's not Man City, but I think there's too much squad rotation and options. Werner may not be the focal point of the attack in a certain game. It may be Ziyech, or it may be Havertz or Pulisic or whoever it may be, right? Or, they've got plenty of options off the bench. Hudson-Odoi, Tammy Abrahams. They've got a lot of guys. So I want to go with a team that doesn't have a whole lot of squad rotation. So I'll go with Mo Salah.
That's a fair choice.
I think it's a fair choice. It's kind of obvious, but I just think Liverpool just doesn't have as much depth. Though I would venture to bet, especially considering the fact that I think Chelsea will have a bit of a lead. This is a projection. Points-wise, I think Liverpool may be battling for second, third, fourth with the Manchester teams. So they'll maybe be putting him in more games that they would normally sit him later in the springtime. So I'll go with Mo Salah. Maybe he bags 28, 30 goals, I'd say.
Yeah, I think if you're going for a safe bet, you're going to go for an Aubameyang, a Salah, something like that. But if you're going for kind of a surprise, I think Werner wouldn't be a terrible shout. And also Gabriel Jesus, if he starts getting regular minutes for Man City.
Too much Sergio Aguero minutes. And the wings are prolific also, but they do score like crazy. So that is an option. But yeah, a lot of great stuff to discuss there in the Prem.
Definitely.
Wait till all the other big leagues in Europe start. That'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And just before we go, I want you to take about maybe 5 minutes or so and just kind of run down the Lionel Messi not so transfer saga. Just let us know what all happened and how we got where we are.
Yeah, pretty sad. If anyone has watched the interview that Lionel Messi did with, I believe it was Goal, that was one of the most impressive interviews I have ever seen from an athlete. And hearing from Messi what was going on behind the scenes and everything, it really makes you feel for him. Hearing that he was screwed over, that he was run amok, I guess, it really makes you feel for the guy. And it really is unfortunate to see this amazing relationship between Lionel Messi, one of the greatest players of all time, and FC Barcelona deteriorate to him saying, I don't want to take you to court, so I'll just stay for another year. I think it's really unfortunate. And anyone who's a soccer purist is going to look at that and not be happy. You want the best player in the world to be enjoying his soccer, because if he's not, why would any of us, And it's really unfortunate to see that.
Yeah, it's a bit tragic, because he's such a passionate player. And this is basically, I know he played for, the Argentinian club, the New Old
Boys, yeah.
New Old Boys,
but
yeah.
that was when he was
right.
really young.
So yeah, what I'm saying is this is his youth academy team.
Mhm.
He's been here since 2001. He's been here for almost 20 years. So it's really tragic, and obviously it comes from Bartomeu and the board not running the team correctly, and it's a top down thing. And he tried to exert some force, and they bullied him into it. And he really, like you mentioned, he could get what he wanted, but he really would hate to hurt the team that he loves so much. So it's really tragic. So I don't really know what's left to say other than I don't know. See you at the Etihad in 2021, Messi.
Yeah, I think so. I think unless, and I put this down here, there would need to be massive changes, like absolutely historic changes.
Where's the money?
Well, not just money, but I think it would have to be, they would need to compete for La Liga and probably win it. They would have to compete in the Copa del Rey and probably win it. And then they would have to compete heavily in the Champions League.
And Bartomeu would have to resign.
Yeah,
but the odd thing about the Bartomeu resigning thing is his successor would be up, there would be an election in the summer of 2021 anyway. So Messi would just back his candidate, if he were to stay. So there's a whole mess, and it's a whole thing, and it's just really unfortunate the way it ended, because I really would love to see Messi in the Prem right now playing for Man City. Then I probably would have had them winning the league.
I mean, how do you not put a team with Lionel Messi at top spot?
So yeah, it was a whole saga. We covered the whole thing. Nothing ended up happening, but it was still quite fascinating, and an insight into how the club is run and how this player thinks.
Absolutely. And Professor Schrader has always said that some of the most intense games are 0-0s. And, no goals have to be scored, but something monumental has definitely occurred here.
Tremendous analogy. Yeah. Honestly, this is probably the most exciting transfer saga of all time.
And nothing
even though there was no transfer.
Yeah, exactly.
So this was great. And again, the great thing about it is in the back of your head, 2021 is going to be big.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that'll be interesting. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and that is also it for episode 30 of the Unqualified Opinions Sports Podcast. No, it was a long one, so thank you for staying with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comment section down below. Well, that's all the time we have. Again, however you watched and however you listened, wherever you were, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time